Order this hearing of the Senate Budget Committee entitled Cultivating Stewardship, Examining the Changing Agricultural Landscape. Now that our ranking member has had the opportunity to perform the vital political task of recognizing and greeting his fellow Iowans, we will proceed with opening statements from myself and from Senator Grassley, followed by 5-minute statements by each of the witnesses. Your full written testimony will be made part of the record, so don't worry about that. And we would like to confine you to 5 minutes in your oral opening statement so that we can move to the question and answer phase. I believe we're going to have quite considerable turnout for this hearing, so the quicker we get to questions, the happier are the members, the happier is the chair. So, Ranking Member Grassley, members of the committee, witnesses, and guests, welcome to our 13th Budget Committee hearing. Today we return to our series on the economic toll of a changing climate, this time with a bipartisan hearing. Thank you very much, Senator Grassley, with witnesses on both sides, agreed to by both sides. We will hear from farmers on the front line about climate risks to the agriculture sector, the associated economic and budgetary costs, and the important steps that we can take to help mitigate those costs. As we've highlighted in this series, the ongoing climate crisis poses enormous threats to people's well-being on this planet and to our industries, our livelihoods, and our entire economy. Our nation's agricultural landscape is changing. Unpredictable weather has always been a challenge to raising crops and livestock, but farmers are seeing more frequent and extreme weather variability than ever before. Events that used to be considered anomalies now occur with increasing regularity. For decades, California faced record-breaking droughts. This year, California crops face record floods. Last year, Kansas suffered a triple-digit heat wave that killed thousands of cattle. This year, Kansas is struggling with a drought, forcing farmers to abandon their wheat fields. In 2018, Hurricane Michael swept through Florida and Georgia, damaging cotton, pecan, and poultry farms. Last year, Florida citrus farms hit historic production lows after twin hurricanes, Ian and Nicole. Atypical events are the new norm, leading to lower crop yields, lower livestock productivity, worse pests and disease, and reduced soil fertility. Consumers see the impacts of climate change on their grocery bills and will continue to bear the brunt of lower crop yields and increased production costs. As climate change affects food production in our country, it's also affecting food production around the world. The United States imports a third of our fresh vegetables, more than half our fresh fruit, and 94% of the seafood we consume. Global weather variability disrupting supply chains and global agricultural productivity will have far-reaching effects on food prices and supply. U.S. government programs that protect growers and stabilize the agricultural economy move the costs of damaging weather to the federal government. The largest is the Federal Crop Insurance Program. In 2022, the federal government spent over $15 billion on that program, which included over $11.6 billion in premium subsidies. Indemnities, what the government paid out to those affected, in the last year were around $18 billion. As climate change makes farming and raising livestock more unpredictable, that cost will continue to grow. Spending on other disaster assistance programs is also likely to grow as extreme weather events become more prevalent. In just 3 years of the Emergency Relief Program, the federal government has already disbursed more than $7.4 billion to help agricultural producers. This is on top of the Wildfire and Hurricane Indemnity Program, which provided payments to farmers for losses caused by hurricanes, wildfires, and other natural disasters. Ranking Member Grassley and I agree that the agricultural sector can play a role in the climate solution. As we'll hear today, climate-smart agriculture can drive down greenhouse gas emissions such as methane. It can improve soil health and sequester carbon, and it can help make farms stronger in the face of a changing climate. Farmers know that climate-smart practices such as cover crops, no-till, and diversification increase food production and make agriculture more resilient. Farmers like those here today are on the front lines of building resilience and adapting to a changing agricultural landscape. Major agricultural corporations like Cargill warn that Midwestern production of some commodities like wheat and corn could drop by as much as 69% by the end of the century absent significant emissions mitigation or adaptation. Our collective future depends on getting it right on climate, and I'm delighted that we have these witnesses here today, and turn to my distinguished ranking member, Senator Grassley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We're holding our 9th hearing on climate change. In each of these hearings, I've taken an opportunity to remind everybody what the Budget Committee is about. So I urge the committee to focus more on our country's unsustainable debt. And my reminding every opening of this committee of that isn't going to stop today. However, I appreciate the chairman holding this bipartisan hearing that will shine light on actions of farmers in Iowa and across the nation that these farmers are already taking to reduce emissions and improve the environment. And remember, the family farmers of America are only 2% of the population. They feed the other 98% in America, but they also export about 1/3 of production, so feeding people elsewhere on this globe. During my time in the Senate, I've discovered that finding a seemingly small area of bipartisan agreement can lead to lasting change for the sake of our constituents. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope today's base of goodwill and camaraderie will serve as a springboard for our future work on bipartisan budget process reform. There are millions of family farmers across the country and 86,000 in Iowa. While they may not ask for it, they deserve a pat on the back from this standpoint of what they do about global warming, and I thank the chairman for making that very clear in his opening statement. Iowa has a global reputation as an agricultural powerhouse. We're a leading producer of pork, corn, soybeans, and eggs. We feed and fuel millions of people around the world. From the farm to the fork, Iowa's agricultural abundance creates jobs in multiple sectors. The economic benefits of agriculture are easy to see throughout this food supply chain, but a farmer's relationship with the environment is often difficult for folks on the West and East Coast to understand. I can tell you from personal experience as a farmer myself that farmers are the greatest stewards of their land. They know that it's good for the land. They know it's good for future generations. They know it's good for prosperity, and it's the right thing to do. From the use of no-till to cover crops to precision agricultural technologies, farmers have proven that they place the highest priority on a healthy environment. That's because farming is oftentimes a family business. Family farms want to make sure that they leave the land better for the next generation than when it was entrusted to their care. And often that next generation comes from within that very family. The first step to running a sustainable farm is for the farm to at least to be able to pay the bills. Only then can a farmer implement practices that reduce emissions and improve soil health. When government adds red tape to farming operations, it can add cost and in turn reduces the ability for farmers to add sustainable practices. And one of those regulations that EPA's putting out, that maybe will be halted now because of a recent Supreme Court decision last week, is waters of the U.S. The Iowa Farm Bureau put out a map, maybe during the Obama administration, but it'd still be applicable in the Biden administration, that government regulation would affect 97% of the land in the state of Iowa. And how can you farm if every time you go to the field, you're having to worry about, are you violating some regulation? That's just one example of a lot of government help that farmers don't need if they're going to be prosperous and do for the environment what must be done. Today's panel is an impressive group from rural America. They illustrate that farmers are actively working to confront the impact of weather events like flooding and drought. Moreover, they're a testament to the fact that we can reduce emissions, improve soil conditions, increase crop yields, and yet run successful farming operation at the same time, and we can do it without destructive government regulations. So I'm going to take the rest of my time to introduce the two Iowans that are here. Probably don't do them justice with my short introduction, but I want to welcome Brent Johnson. He grows corn and soybeans on his family farm in Calhoun County. He's a precision agricultural expert, agronomist, and certified crop advisor. He also happens to serve as president of the Iowa Farm Bureau. I've been a member of that organization for longer than you've been alive, 67 years, so I know that it's a good organization and you're going to be a good spokesman for them. He was a 2020 recipient of the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship Environmental Leader Award. Few know Iowa farming better than Brent does. We also welcome Mr. Brian Sievers, who operates a grain and livestock farm in Scott County. Following 2 terms in the Iowa State Legislature, he commissioned his anaerobic digester system in 2013. It processes beef cattle manure, food waste, and biomass with nutrient-dense fertilizer and biogas. He is the vice chair of the American Biogas Council Board of Directors and recently joined the Rosaline Alternative Energy to produce renewable natural gas from his digesters. Brian exemplifies what it takes to be innovative and kind of all of the above approach to achieve energy security. And the other 2 people I won't introduce, but I want to welcome you as well.
Thanks very much, Senator Grassley. I cannot improve on your introduction of your fellow Iowans, so let me just recognize also Brandon Willis, who is here testifying today, an assistant professor of applied economics at Utah State University. Prior to that, he served as the administrator of the Risk Management Agency at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and as senior advisor to the Secretary of Agriculture. Before that, he was a Senate staffer, so welcome back, Mr. Willis. Thank you for being here. We look forward to your perspective as a former USDA official. And our last witness is Martin Larson, a 5th-generation farmer near Byron, Minnesota. The Larson family was recently recognized as Olmsted County Farm Family of the Year for their conservation work and community involvement. Mr. Larson also works for the Olmsted County Soil and Water Conservation District, where he provides technical assistance to farmers and manages a 40-acre test plot for building healthy soil. Mr. Larson, thank you for being here, and we look forward to your testimony. Let me say you're all equally welcome, even if you're not Iowans. And as I close with my greetings, let me also recognize that the distinguished chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee is with us, Senator Stabenow of Michigan. Thank you very much, Debbie, for being here. And with that, let me turn first to Mr. Willis. Please proceed.
Chairman Whitehouse, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of this committee, thank you for allowing me to testify today. My testimony will focus on crop insurance. My name is Brandon Willis, and I'm currently an assistant professor at Utah State University. I grew up on a sheep ranch in northern Utah. I spent several years in Washington, D.C., as you mentioned, where I worked as an agricultural staffer for former Senator Max Baucus. And then I went down to the Department of Agriculture, where I worked at the Farm Service Agency, was a senior advisor to Secretary Vilsack, and oversaw the crop insurance programs for 4 years as the administrator of the Risk Management Agency. In each of these roles, I saw the impacts that Mother Nature could have on agriculture. I also witnessed the value of USDA safety net programs. We often discuss the financial impact of crop insurance, yet I also saw significant value in the peace of mind that it provided to producers struggling through challenging circumstances. Years ago, Benjamin Franklin said, "I have sometimes thought it might be well to establish an office of insurance for farms against the damage that may occur to them from storms, blights, insects, etc. A small sum paid by a number would repair such losses and prevent much poverty and distress." Today we have that program. It's not perfect, yet it is the envy of many other nations because of the value and stability it provides. It's easy to overlook what we have, a well-ran program that allows farmers to farm and Congress to focus on other issues rather than constantly passing ad hoc disaster. Congress has set the program up to balance the unique strengths of the private and public sectors. The results are that farmers receive payments quickly, and the program has one of the lowest improper payment rates of any government program. When considering the impact of climate change on crop insurance, it's worth noting that USDA has already adjusted how rates are determined by using a shorter time period to set rates. This will help the program adjust quicker to changing climate conditions. How will climate change impact crop insurance? Numerous reports have been written on the topic. The consensus is that climate change has already impacted crop insurance costs and will continue to impact them. However, the exact extent is subject to debate. A Stanford study from 2021 found that climate change has increased crop insurance expenses from 1991 to 2017 by approximately 19%. This research showed that increased costs, primarily due to heat and drought, have risen due to climate change, leading to more crop losses and damages. However, the study also acknowledged some limitations, such as the challenges in precisely attributing specific weather events to climate change and uncertainty surrounding future climate projections. USDA's Economic Research Service analyzed the potential impacts of climate change. The study found that climate change is expected to raise the program's cost due to two main factors. First, increased insured value and increased yield variability. As temperatures rise, the insured value of crops is projected to increase as farmers aim to protect higher value crops from potential losses. Additionally, climate change is likely to result in more frequent and severe weather events, leading to greater yield variability and increased insurance claims. The study also emphasized that these projections are subject to uncertainties, such as the effectiveness of adaptive measures and changes in farm management practices. The study examined two emission scenarios. The moderate emission scenario predicted a gradual increase in greenhouse gas emissions, while the higher emission scenario represented a more rapid and extensive rise. The study estimated the moderate emission scenario would lead to a 3% increase in costs, while the higher emission scenario would result in a 22% increase. However, if farmer adaptation isn't considered, the cost increase was projected at 10 and 37% respectively. The stark differences in projected costs between scenarios where adaptation takes place and where adaptation doesn't take place highlight a need for all USDA programs, particularly crop insurance, to ensure that program rules do not inhibit the ability of farmers to adapt. Finally, what should Congress do to ensure crop insurance continues functioning properly during uncertain conditions? First, Congress needs to ensure that USDA continues to run the program in a way that allows farmers the flexibility to adapt to potentially changing conditions. Second, Congress must ensure USDA has the ability to hire and retain those employees who can properly oversee extremely complex insurance products. In conclusion, I would like to thank this committee for the opportunity to be here today. I look forward to answering any questions you may have for me.
Thanks very much, Mr. Willis. Over to you, Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Chairman Whitehouse, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of the committee for the invitation to speak with you today. The Larson family has been farming near Byron in southeast Minnesota for 5 generations. Parts of it have been in continuous ownership of my family for 7 generations, and my son will be the 8th. He's sitting behind me here today. In addition to corn and soybeans, we raise food-grade oats, barley, and forestry, including a sawmill. I also work off the farm for Olmsted County Soil and Water Conservation District. I was raised as many farm kids are and started helping with field work when I was 13. I worked on the farm after high school and put in my sweat equity. In 2010, I took on the decision-making role as my father and uncle began phasing into retirement. I can share my experiences in farming in southeast Minnesota in my lifetime, and I'm fairly alarmed at the frequency and distribution of adverse weather events in southeast Minnesota. We are experiencing broken weather records most years, potentially multiple, and records may be broken by large amounts. It may be from flooding, snow, cold, hot, dry, winter derechos, summer derechos, and all things in between. It feels something like this. If I put one hand in ice water and the other in the oven, I'm on average, in an average temperature, right? An average moisture. Weather data indicates we are getting wetter on average. However, these precipitation events often come in short duration, and that high-intensity rain is too much for most soils to handle, which is leading to increased erosion and flash flooding. Such as this spring, much of my region received nearly 6 inches of rain in the second week of May, and not a drop since. The planted corn and soybeans were vulnerable, and many acres needed to be replanted. In fact, that's what I did Monday night prior to boarding the plane to come here yesterday. I recall the flooding in August of 2007 when the nearby community of Hoka received 15.1 inches of rain in 24 hours. At home, I received just under 7. Historically, annual precipitation in my area is a little over 30 inches. In a number of recent years, we have received nearly twice that. In May of 2013, which has probably shaped my farming practices more than any other event, was a snowfall that took place in southern Minnesota in those first few days of May. We received nearly 14 inches of wet, heavy snow. We were supposed to be planting in corn, but instead we were shoveling roofs to avoid collapse, rescuing new calves, and plowing out neighbors. This was my first widespread experience with accessing prevent planting coverage within USDA's risk management agency crop insurance. Almost half of the region's crops were never planted. And of course, there are costs to these events. There's costs to our infrastructure, such as building collapse or floods. There are costs to our agricultural production, such as in 2019, there was a 50% reduction of yield in Olmsted County. Wildfire and Hurricane Indemnity Plus program, as well as large crop insurance indemnities were accessed so that we could bridge the enormous loss of production. There are costs to our soils due to the increased erosion. The soil is our most valued asset as a farmer, such as Brian and I discussing before the hearing here about land values. But that fertile soil only has value to us when we can grow crops into it, and it is only a cost to the water bodies and communities when it moves downstream. Most importantly, there are costs to our mental health. No one wants to talk to a farmer who lost their freestall barn like I did in 2019 and had to find new homes for the cattle. They had to clean up the building and negotiate with the insurance company, and it clearly took its toll on him. Of course, this changed the way I farm. Its climate resiliency is now something I and many other farmers in the region plan for. And we've integrated large-scale farming practices to battle the extreme weather. It could be cover crops, but also changing from a corn and soybean rotation to multiple crops in our rotation. We meet as a Byron area farmers group to discuss about these experiences, and that group is diverse and covers not just small farmers, but large farmers as well. In conclusion, weather extremes will increase the risk for farmers, and there are increased costs associated with reduced crop production, crop insurance indemnities, and infrastructure damage. And encourage that the commission, the committee, to take these my comments and my testimony into account. And thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. We turn now to Mr. Johnson.
Good morning, Chairman Whitehouse, Ranking Member Grassley, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Brent Johnson. I'm a fifth-generation farmer from Calhoun County, Iowa, and a certified crop advisor of 25 years. I've founded my own independent crop consulting business where I've worked with thousands of farmers to meet their goals on over 1 million acres. I am also the 14th president of the Iowa Farm Bureau, representing 154,000 members. The United States leads the world in production and innovation. U.S. agriculture has always been the forefront of that innovation. America's farmers know that agriculture is a part of the solution to our climate challenges. On my farm, we have implemented precision ag technology to provide our crops with precise levels of nutrients exactly when and where it's needed. And conservation tillage practices have evolved over time to include strip till, no-till, and cover crops. While the auto industry continues to test driverless cars, my tractors have autonomously done the driving on my farm for 15 years. My job of driving the tractor has been replaced by my job of making sure that the implement pulled by the tractor is working correctly and efficiently. Planter technology tells me exactly where I've placed every kernel of corn, the moisture content of the soil, and even adjust the planting population automatically. Sprayers have the ability to identify weeds and spray them independently from the crops. I can utilize imagery from drones or satellites to monitor my crops and, if needed, make adjustments in real time. I can use telematics to virtually connect different farm implements so they can work together. Every pass through the field is spatially recorded with multiple layers of information, and that data is automatically sent back to my farm office for further analysis. I've been fortunate to travel the world promoting U.S. agriculture while also talking with farmers from across the globe. And I can assure you that Iowa farmers are literally the best at what they do. It is well known that Iowa is a world leader in agriculture production, but we're also early adopters and leaders when it comes to proven conservation practices. In terms of protecting the environment, Iowa ranks first nationally in CRP acres as a percentage of area, as well as first in the use of buffer strips, grass waterways, filter strips, pollinator habitats, bioreactors, saturated buffers, and constructed wetlands. We rank third in no-till acres and first in conservation tillage. Iowa also has nearly 3 million acres of cover crops and over 506,000 terraces that stretch over 85,000 miles. In terms of protecting our water, farmers have reduced phosphorus loss by 27%. Nitrogen use has not increased on Iowa farms since the 1980s, and now the use of that vital nutrient is also starting to trend down. These advancements are possible because of technology improvements in machinery, genetics, and a new horizon of biologicals and seed treatments that will help farmers continue to increase production while simultaneously improving the environment. As you can see, farmers are certainly doing their part. Personally, I am really proud of the progress that agriculture has made, and I am amazed at the speed of adoption and depth of innovation that is bred on farms across this country. Our history shows a track record of progress that is hardwired into the soul of farmers. Like mine, most farms in Iowa are true multi-generational family farms. Iowa producers are active participants in government and voluntary programs, but burdensome regulation will drive consolidation, remove creativity and innovation, and ultimately impede sustainability progress. My ask of you is to help us continue to make progress in sustainability. Help us by advancing technology, help us by funding research, help us by allowing multi-generational farmers who are literally the best in the world do their job even better for years to come. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Sievers.
Good morning, Chairman Whitehouse, Ranking Member Grassley, and the Senate Budget Committee. Thank you for offering me the opportunity to discuss how new stewardship practices that farmers are implementing on their farms and ranches are leading the way in our changing agricultural landscape. My name is Brian Sievers. My wife Lisa and I operate a diversified grain and livestock farm in eastern Iowa. We own and operate a 2,400 head beef cattle feedlot and raise corn, soybeans, hay, winter wheat, cover crops, and native prairie grasses on approximately 2,000 acres. Along with our partner, Raceline Alternative Energy, we also own and operate an on-farm anaerobic digester, which processes the livestock manure from our cover crops to produce renewable energy and sustainable, natural, renewable fertilizers for our farmland. The relationships we've established with Raceline Alternative Energy and its founder, Rudy Raceline, along with organizations such as the American Biogas Council, Solutions from the Land, the Iowa Smart Agriculture Group, Iowa State University's and Penn State University's Grass to Gas grant program, and a large number of conservation and wildlife organizations, veterans groups, and commodity trade organizations will help grow the opportunities to enhance stewardship in our farming and livestock operations in the very near future. This coalition has increased significantly as scientific study of anaerobic digestion has demonstrated the benefits from biomass harvest and processing of winter hardy cover crops, such as cereal rye, along with the biomass feedstocks from our new or previously established native prairie, along with the more traditional feedstocks, such as swine, dairy, and beef cattle manure, and food waste. These recent advances in science, research, and technologies, coupled with the new federal incentives, will allow the anaerobic digestion industry to grow significantly in the near future. The growth will allow the agricultural sector to provide significant yet practical solutions to enhancing soil health, water and air quality, food security, energy security, environmental and ecological services, wildlife habitat restoration, and carbon sequestration efforts. If I told you there was a way to increase farm sustainability and urban recycling, reduce municipal costs, and produce renewable energy in many different forms, plus fossil fuel-free fertilizers, would you say it's worth supporting? All of this and more is what anaerobic digestion technology offers, and we need to do more to embrace it, putting it on par with other renewables from a policy standpoint, but also recognizing that these anaerobic digestion systems offer communities so much more than just renewable energy. Digesters are unique in being able to produce an all-of-the-above set of solutions with respect to energy production, while also returning all of its organic inputs back to the soil to improve soil health, including soil carbon, organic matter, fertility, microbial activity, ecological services, and wildlife habitat. Anaerobic digestion is unique with its ability to provide multiple benefits, including economic security, energy security, food security, and fertilizer security, while also addressing our changing climatic conditions. While enhancing the health of our soils, our water, and our natural resources, a growing biogas and anaerobic digestion industry can also provide vibrant, exciting new ways for rural economic growth, development, and job creation using recent advances in the technology of anaerobic digestion of organic feedstocks. There are a few policies that can help ensure Americans can benefit from these wide-ranging solutions, which stem from a circular approach to agriculture production. While approximately 500 farm-based anaerobic digesters have been built in the U.S. so far, we see the opportunity for at least 8,000 more systems to be built. The energy and conservation titles of the 2023 Farm Bill, including the REAP program and its underutilized technologies reserve, are key to this deployment and need full funding. Cuts to the grants or loans portion of the REAP program will reduce in rural investment, jobs, and sustainability. Farmers and small businesses around the United States believe the REAP program is a model for public-private partnering which promotes rural economic development and environmental stewardship with common sense flexibility. Finally, we recognize that many of the Senate Budget Committee members will also be active in Farm Bill deliberations, and we ask you to support and incentivize Farm Bill changes that allow the use of CRP acres as a feedstock for on-farm anaerobic digestion. Current policy on CRP acres has not kept pace with innovation. We also ask that winter hardy cover crops such as cereal rye are recognized by Congress as a cellulosic feedstock under the Renewable Fuel Standard so they can be fully and fairly utilized in anaerobic digestion systems and provide renewable transportation fuel. Mr. Chairman, our ask of the Senate Budget Committee and Congress is simple. Evolve our policies in these ways to keep up with the innovations in agriculture, modern stewardship of our lands, and renewable energy production so our industry can deliver multiple economic benefits and ecosystem services to Americans. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Grassley, thank you again for the opportunity to provide this testimony, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Well, Mr. Sievers, your pitch to members of the Ag Committee could not be more timely with Chairman Stabenow here. In order to take advantage of her being here, what I'm going to do is swap my time for her time. So I will go back into the line and recognize first Chairman Stabenow, then Ranking Member Grassley, and on through the list of the rest of the attendees, and I'll plug myself in Senator Stabenow's spot. So with that, let me turn to the distinguished chair of the Ag Committee.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for doing this really important hearing. It's so great to see all of you. And I get excited listening to the innovation and research and the things that we can continue to do. And of course, Senator Grassley is a senior member of the committee, a very important voice as we are drafting the 2023 Farm Bill. I also want to give a shout out to Iowa farmers, no questions. Congratulations on leading the way. Michigan farmers are pretty good too, though. I would just say we're working hard as well. But from my perspective, and I know for all of you, I mean, nobody is impacted more by what's happening on the weather from the climate crisis than farmers. Nobody else has to get up every morning and look at the weather and figure out what's going on like all of you have to do. I mean, it is, and it is very concerning to me as we watch this going forward. So I appreciate all of your leadership. We know across the globe, the climate crisis has slowed the growth of agricultural productivity. And meeting with farmers around the world, I've certainly had those conversations. Extreme weather events destroying crops with alarming frequencies. We know the fires, the droughts, the floods in Michigan, where we grow a lot of specialty crops, a lot of fruit trees. We've certainly seen climate-driven weather that brought the buds on the cherry trees out in February, and then a deep freeze in March and wipe out the crop. And so we see this over and over again. And in Michigan, frankly, Lake Superior is now one of the 5 fastest warming lakes in the world, which for us is a pretty frightening thing to see as well. We know that the crisis has taken a costly toll on farmers, which is why I appreciate the Budget Committee doing this hearing. Financial blows, personal heartbreak, unpredictable weather destroying a crop. And we have, in fact, had as our major risk management tool federal crop insurance. And so I know this is widely used. There are other important pieces of the Farm Bill, but this is widely used. And we know, and Mr. Willis, appreciate your work and all your many hats over the years, but the USDA has noted that costs are going up. And if we don't get our arms around this and be aggressively focusing and supporting your efforts, they're going to continue to go on. And frankly, it's not enough just to assist farmers after there's a storm or a drought. We do that. We have put $90 billion in the last few years, Mr. Chairman, into disaster assistance, issues related to what's happened around trade with China or COVID. When we're good at putting it in after. We need to be supporting on the front end. And that's why what we did last year was so significant in the investments we did with what we have dubbed climate smart agriculture and climate smart forestry, which is what all of you are doing. I mean, that's what we're talking about, is doubling down so more people can sign up for EQIP, more people can sign up for RCPP or use CRP and so on. That's really what we're doing. The other thing that we did, and also we added more money to REAP. I was so pleased to hear you talk about that. Very, very important for growers, and we need to make sure we're keeping that there. And the transition to clean, renewable energy for our rural electric co-ops, which is a very significant piece of what we are doing around reducing costs and reducing pollution. We also passed our Bipartisan Growing Climate Solutions Act, which our chairman was a significant partner in getting done, which I hope is going to make sure that USDA is going to help provide more market incentives and innovative approaches to deal with carbon sequestration and so on. All of that to say, let me move to a couple of questions. So glad to see farmers on the panel. And Mr. Larson, let me ask, you talked about the importance of planning for climate resiliency through crop diversification. So I wonder if you might talk more about that. Do you think it's important for Congress to explore policy options to help farmers wanting to diversify their operations? Or do you think at this point it's just a matter of making those choices?
Yeah, thank you. So there's a couple ways to look at that from my perspective. And one is that crop diversity puts vulnerable times for yield production at different times of the year. So in the Corn Belt and the Grain Belt, we say that July makes the corn, August makes the beans. Well, what time of year makes the oats, like my oat crop? Well, it's right now as they're making grain. And the oats, frankly, don't care about a dry August because they're in the grain bin and they're getting processed into food. So that's one way to manage risk from a farmer's perspective. From a policy perspective, we need to look at the ease of transition from a farmer who's looking at growing a crop outside of corn and soybeans and the ease in which they can implement that. So, you know, in my area, we have very good APHs on corn and soybeans. That is our proven yields on corn and soybeans. But if we were to step outside of those proven yields into a crop we haven't grown before, such as oats or something else, we don't have that protection of a good APH. So we need some kind of bridge programs to get us into growing something different. Or we also need to look at the market side of it too, so that there's opportunities, grants, et cetera, to go to the market side of what we can grow in the Corn Belt. Because we grow corn and soybeans doesn't mean that we can't grow a plethora of other crops. We can. If that market existed, and profitability was there, risk mitigation from a farmer's perspective was there, we would do it.
If I might just ask, just very quickly, Mr. Willis, and we can follow up on this, but you talked about crop insurance and making sure that we don't have policies prohibiting the ability of farmers to adapt to climate change. And I wondered, are there things we need to be doing to make it easier to use crop insurance and at the same time adapt to the conservation practices that we want to have happening?
First of all, let me just say thank you for everything you have done and continue to do for agriculture. You've been a tremendous chair, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You've been a champion. You had a Farm Bill provision on cover crops. I think that was a very positive thing, and I think USA is obviously doing what they can on cover crops. It's an ever-evolving issue. The other panelists have talked about all the innovative things they're doing, and so I don't think there's a simple answer. I think the simple answer is, you know, Congress has oversight, and I would exercise that and make sure that USDA is keeping up with the newest practices so that farmers never have to make a decision between crop insurance and doing something beneficial for the environment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I very much appreciate your letting me go first today. And I'm running over to the Agriculture Committee now where we have a hearing going on. So thank you.
Very happy to do it. Now I turn to my ranking member and a distinguished senior. Have you chaired the Agriculture Committee also?
No,
Not yet?
It's my third committee, and I'm way down on seniority.
You were with us and then you came back again.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
So from ag to ag, you're doing very well here, Mr. Sievers.
Okay, yeah.
Ranking Member Grassley.
Anyway, I think you answered my first question because it's going to be how long your family's been farming. You said fifth generation. You went into the innovative practices that you've done. I think you touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to have you emphasize for the committee how precision agriculture increased your crop yields and at the same time protected the environment.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Yeah, so I am a fifth-generation farmer. Actually, my great-great-grandfather established our farm in 1893. So, and he came from a farm in Germany. So, our family history in agriculture goes back multi generations. So, as far as adopting precision agriculture on our farm, it's become a necessity when it comes to management of agriculture. So as many of the panelists have described already, the risks are great and growing. So the ability to make progress, to me, starts with measurement and management. So if I can't measure it, I can't make progress. So the ability to adopt precision agriculture, you know, we've walked through the steps as technology has come through the generations. when I was a little kid, technology meant how much tillage could you do. And I remember being in a tractor with a plow, and to be a good farmer, you had to turn your fields black because that's the technology that we had. Fast forward, my family adopted conservation tillage, and now as I started farming, we've adopted strip tillage and no tillage, and so the progress comes with technology advancements, and that also includes the ability for the seed in genetics to be able to handle that, and the ability to manage machinery properly and find those efficiencies, and so to measure what's happening in the field, understand where the parts of the field can actually do better than they're doing today, and other parts of the field that, we don't need to spend so much money or time or inputs on because the potential just isn't there. It allows me to focus dollars, and that allows me to then manage my risk in a way to manage those inputs. Agriculture has so many aspects about it that are not in our control, and when you do find those things, the best managers take those opportunities and manage those as best you can. And for me, precision agriculture has allowed me to increase my yields while reducing my inputs. So my efficiency numbers have actually been growing. There's a measurement that some farmers use. It's a nitrogen use efficiency number. The old rule of thumb used to be it takes 1.2 pounds of nitrogen to produce a bushel of corn. Through precision agriculture, I have found parts of my field where I have been able to reduce that number down to 1/2 pound of nitrogen per bushel. That's not everywhere in the field, so when I find those areas, I can manage that properly. And so that's where precision agriculture for me plays a huge impact into risk mitigation and my ability to do my job even better next year.
Mr. Sievers, let's talk about anaerobic digesters. What are the ecological benefits provided by them, and how do you anticipate biogas being used in the future as part of what you call all of the above energy strategy?
Thank you, Senator. I'll give you the short answer when it comes to ecological services first. Really, that's the benefits that humans derive from nature or our natural resources. And, more specifically, it's the goods and services that are provided by those natural resources or nature from those ecosystems. And so I can give you an example, and this is where the real aha moment came for me when I implemented our anaerobic digester, is that as we evaluate the grid soil sampling that we've conducted on our farm for many years, we obviously noticed that our soil organic matter levels had bottomed out, if you will, in that 3.5% to 4% range back in around 2010 and 11. When we started using the material that comes out of our digesters, which is what we refer to as digestate, and use that as our soil amendment to help improve our fertility, to meet the needs of our corn and soybean crops, we noticed within 5 years our organic matter contents were starting to go back up. That reverses a 150-year trend. And that was rather significant. When you could take organic matter contents at 3.5% to 4% and increase those to the low 5% range in just 5 to 7 years after implementing that practice, that was significant. Those are benefits that are going to be paid forward for many, many generations. That's an ecological service and a benefit we've provided to the public. How do you measure and monetize that? That's the challenge. That's where we think carbon credits come into play. So that's one area where I've been able to identify and recognize the benefits from using the fertilizers that we produce right on our own farm. We've eliminated essentially synthetic fertilization of our crops on those 2,000 acres, and not just our 2,000 acres, but actually another 1,500 acres in our neighbors' farms and fields around our facility as well. In the future, I think that there's several pathways. One is to be able to use biogas as a renewable, as you scrub that and clean it up and produce renewable natural gas, it becomes an alternative to potentially biodiesel or renewable diesel. There are certainly cost advantages to renewable natural gas as compared to diesel fuel. We see costs that are in the range of 40 to 50% less on a per unit, MMBTU unit. So there's certainly some real economic benefits to using renewable natural gas. But we also understand that there's challenges to using renewable natural gas. However, being able to use our existing pipeline system for that renewable natural gas is a tremendous benefit that can be provided. We have an extensive well-connected natural gas pipeline system in this country. Let's use it through the utilization of renewable natural gas. But even more importantly, we can also see biogas as used as what we call an intermediate or biointermediate in the production of biodiesel or renewable diesel or even ethanol. So in Iowa, for example, where we have the 43 ethanol plants and about 10 different biodiesel plants, that input of biogas can help drive down the carbon intensity of those renewable fuels as well. So it's very flexible in the benefits that can be derived. It can be used as an input on the supply side in the production of other renewable liquid transportation fuels. It can also be used directly as a liquid renewable transportation fuel. But then finally, another option is to use it as electricity, as a way to fuel electricity for electric vehicles. That certainly is controversial right now. We had hoped that there would be an e-RINs proposal coming from the EPA under the SET rule. It does not look like that's going to be forthcoming in the June 14th RFS announcement. But we do anticipate that there will be continued work, and we think that the electricity provides options to biogas producers who are isolated. They maybe have stranded assets where they can't access a pipeline with their biogas or renewable natural gas. And when you look at the number of digesters that are currently on farms right now, close to 500 that I mentioned earlier, the vast majority of those are still producing electricity with their biogas. And so being able to utilize that electricity for that particular purpose would save significant investment for those farmers by being able to produce electricity from the biogas. So that's still an option that I think we need to keep in mind, and we hope that the EPA can move forward with a very fair and equitable approach to integrating e-RINs and biogas from on-farm anaerobic digesters. But right now, the pathway for biogas is certainly through renewable natural gas and or used as a biointermediate in the production of other renewable transportation fuels.
You're most welcome, Senator Grassley. Next is Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member for this hearing, and I want to thank everyone for making time and coming out today as well. Now, crop insurance is an important risk management tool that farmers and ranchers across this nation rely on to ensure their livelihoods and not put at risk when adverse weather impacts that year's crops. I'm excited to be working with several other members of this committee on strengthening these programs through the Farm Bill. Now, today, however, I want to focus on how climate change impacts our farming and ranching communities and the resulting cost challenges. I have argued that many federal programs were not crafted with dry states like New Mexico in mind. But that is a conversation for a different day and for a different committee. Producers in New Mexico are already seeing firsthand how their coverage is being impacted by long-term drought through policies such as the 1 in 4 rule, which removed a producer's coverage when they were experiencing prolonged periods of droughts. As you all know, the 1 in 4 rule was written for, I think, one state in particular, down in the southeastern part of our beautiful country. It's a little wetter down there than it is where I come from. I'm grateful that the rule has since been temporarily waived for some western states, but farmers and ranchers will face similar challenges in the future as extreme droughts only grow as a problem. Now, Mr. Willis, yes or no, as climate change patterns persist, will the current risk management tools such as the federal crop insurance program remain an important safety net for farmers and ranchers?
Yes.
My follow-up there comes from a perspective of farmer-to-farmer issue. As climate change patterns persist, our farmers and ranchers must be provided with the support and tools they need to combat climate change while ensuring the health of their operations. Just as important, though, is information sharing and promotion, especially as new techniques and resources are made available. Now, Mr. Larson, I appreciate in your testimony that you mentioned the importance of farmer-to-farmer learning and how that has helped the farmers and ranchers in your community adopt soil health practices. Mr. Larson, how can farmer-to-farmer education help farmers not only improve the climate resiliency of their own operations, but in turn lower USDA program costs?
Thanks. You know, the Byron Area Farmers Group started meeting at the local restaurant, just a few handfuls of us, and we started sharing our experiences, and good and bad, right? And, 2013 was our first experiences in our regions with cover crops. We didn't know if they'd plug our tile lines. The rumors were just as strong as the benefits, right? So about 2015, 2016, this small handful started to grow to 28 to 50 of us meeting now this year. In fact, we just met on Monday as well, Monday afternoon. And that information sharing is so important. Now, I work for the Conservation District, a local government, and farmers have some apprehension when a government employee of any size and any level says, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right? We kind of clam up a little bit. So farmer to farmer is important because many of us grew up together, we farmed together our whole life, and we can share openly what we're doing. And especially when there's a purpose of meeting, and that's to share our conservation stories, our no-till, our alternative crops, our cover crops experiences, because it takes the edge off of that fence row pressure. That is one farmer looking over the fence at the other farmer and wondering what they're up to. So we can share with our guard down, so to speak. And it does lower the cost from a federal perspective, because the more we're doing on the ground level, the grassroots level, the more that can foster. Because we're talking about, change at we would like change at a great scale, right? But grassroots change is where a lot of change starts. And it could start at a restaurant in Byron in southeast Minnesota, and that information sharing. Now, it does take knowledgeable staff from whether it be USDA or local government or other agencies to help us study so that we know which practices are most beneficial for the environment, beneficial for us as producers. And there is companionship with technology. The two don't isolate one another. The two can work together. But in some cases, technology isn't enough to reach the goals that we want. And in some cases, soil health alone isn't enough to reach the goals we want. So it is a combination of all these factors, including the small groups of farmers and fostering those groups and adding energy to them.
I appreciate that. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to share one observation from home. As you know, home for me is in New Mexico, western state. It's a little dry down there on a good day. And the drought's been hitting us horribly over the last few years. But what we've also seen as a result of climate, Mr. Chairman, is the forests are drier longer. It's not just that they're dry up on the surface, but all of that spongy, really good stuff that falls from the trees and whatnot, it's usually wet and the fire rolls on top of it if a fire hits. This year what we saw is it was so dry the fire would duck underneath the ground, not through a tree root, would just duck under that canopy and shoot. You didn't know where it was going to pop back up as well. So while drought is a major concern to us as well, the other side of this is once you have an episode like that, or it's so dry that all the good stuff dries up and is not holding the dirt back anymore, what a normal rainfall can be turns into a 100 or 500 year episode. And that mountain shed, that watershed, instead of it holding back that water, it's like an ice rink. Once that water hits it, it goes. And it's just devastating. And right now we're seeing farmers, producers all over New Mexico that are impacted by what I just described, being devastated when we're blessed with rain. And it's terrifying to see. So I really want to thank you for this hearing as well, and I want to thank the witnesses for coming in. This is a very serious issue and one that matters to New Mexico, western states, but all of America and around the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our ranking member.
Well, thank you, Senator Lujan. I don't think you could have teed up a better segue for your colleague from California than you just did. So with that, let me turn to Senator Padilla.
I think that might even have been intentional. 10x, 20x, however you want to scale up, but that's precisely an issue, starting with when forest fires act like brush fires. You can just imagine the devastation. But thank you all for participating in today's hearing. As members of this committee, we need to obviously consider the economic impacts of extreme weather events holistically, including the many indirect costs to the agricultural industry. And I want to lead by referencing farm workers, who often bear the brunt of indirect costs associated with extreme weather events, which includes but is not limited to severe storms, floods, drought, wildfire, and extreme heat. We saw this in California when recent flooding devastated large swaths of strawberry fields in the towns of Pájaro and Watsonville. It was farm workers who waded through flooded fields or were forced to go without pay, or still being forced to go without pay because of lost crops. Mr. Willis, how often and to what extent do you believe federal agencies and programs factor in the indirect costs of climate change in the agricultural industry, such as loss of livelihoods, exposure to various health threats, and lost productivity?
I want to make sure I understand the question so we don't answer it incorrectly. How often does a crop insurance program take those things into account? Is that the question, sir?
Yeah, not just that specific program, but programs in general, departments and agencies in general.
I think every program's a little bit different. The crop insurance is very focused on the value of the crop and trying to compensate for that. But other crops at the Department of Agriculture, I think, have a broader purpose to them, to be very blunt on that. But the crop insurance really doesn't take those into account. What it does do, though, I think, is provide a lot of confidence for those growers who, if you don't have crop insurance, you're going to make some decisions, letting people go off, et cetera, but you might take a much harsher reaction than crop insurance. So I think it provides somewhat of a buffer financially for producers and benefits the other industries involved and the other people involved.
And look, the example I gave is one of floods, right? That leads to lost crops, so therefore less of a need for the workforce to harvest. And what happens as a result, it's not just those individuals, those families that go without wages, but the community in general goes with a declining tax base because of weather. Same on the drought side of the equation. So any thoughts or suggestions on how to improve these federal programs to be more effective reaching out to workers and the greater community that relies on seasonal or even permanent agricultural jobs?
The best answer I can give you is probably USDA, and they have individuals, probably need to continue to do outreach for those sectors. That's a little out of my area of expertise, and that's about all I would dare say, sir.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the honesty, but sadly I think it's a little out of the expertise or the attention of a lot of federal employees because of the programs and agencies that they work in. Let me do a follow-up question on a more specific topic. California proudly produces 80% of wine in the United States and single-handedly is the fourth largest producer globally. But the vineyards, winery operations, and the jobs and the communities that they support are now routinely facing the threats of wildfires and trying to deal with the impacts of wildfire smoke, which creates an ashy taste known as smoke taint when absorbed into the grape. For growers looking in the northeastern part of the country, they're looking up at the skies right now and looking at the smoke coming in from Canada. The impact of smoke isn't always predictable. Depends on how long the smoke lingers, the variety of the grape, and a number of smoke events, which is why Congress provided the U.S. Department of Agriculture $4.5 million to research the impact of smoke exposure on grapes and wines. So, Mr. Willis, for an industry that generates more than $170 billion in annual economic activity, and by one estimate suffered $3.7 billion in losses in 2020 alone, do you believe Congress can do more to assist researchers to help us protect this vital industry?
I'm going to talk about crop insurance because one of the advantages of crop insurance is you do not have to wait every 5 years for a farm bill. USDA has the authority to adjust those programs to take into account new problems that are coming about, and they have a shorter timeline. And so I do think there are things they can do to address those types of situations, and I think crop insurance is a good tool because they can take the data, they can take the research, they don't have to wait for a farm bill, they can adjust the policy so that it provides, so it's more responsive.
Thank you. And I know my time is up, Mr. Chair, but just one quick follow-up item. I know the general topic of crop insurance has come up, including with Senator Stabenow, who chairs the Agricultural Committee. But can you comment specifically on how it works for specialty crops, which are different than non-specialty crops, obviously?
Certainly, crop insurance started strong in the Midwest over time. There has been a significant effort, there was when I was there, and I know there still is, to try to make crop insurance continually work better for specialty crops, fruits and vegetables. I think from somebody in your shoes, continually to encourage USDA to talk to those groups, to do those listening sessions with areas, there is improvement that needs to be made. But I can tell you from the seat I used to have, it is challenging to know exactly what to do because the risks they suffer are not the same risks the Midwest suffers.
So they're called specialty crops. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for calling this hearing and to the witnesses for coming. I'm frustrated because I'm not on the Ag Committee. I wish I was. Ag and forestry is the #1 industry segment in Virginia. Most people would think it was high-tech or shipbuilding, and those are big industries, but ag and forestry is still #1. Our state suffers, the primary climate challenges we suffer in Virginia are sea level rise in the eastern portion of Virginia, and then extreme rain events that aren't changing the amount of rain we get annually. It's just coming in much more violent episodes rather than kind of smoothed out over the course of the year. But I actually want to take advantage of you for a different reason because you're all experts in farming. If I talk to my Farm Bureau and farmers around Virginia, the #1 issue that they bring up these days is immigration reform. They bring up, boy, it's really hard to hire the people that we need. And so let me just start there. How important is a workforce from other parts of the world, other countries in the United States, to having a successful American agricultural economy?
If I might?
Yeah, please.
Senator, thank you. Certainly there are industries within agriculture that are very dependent. Certainly the dairy, swine industry have become very dependent on immigrant labor. But on the other hand, I think it varies certainly by region and operation. When I look at our own operation, I actually take a lot of pride in the fact that the 6 full-time employees that we have on our farm all grew up in the area and probably wouldn't be farming themselves if it weren't for a job opportunity that we provided on our farm for them. So I think that sentiment or approach to job creation is very important. We need to make sure we're providing jobs for the people in our communities, whether they be immigrants or people that might have been born and raised on that farm and may have gone elsewhere if not for that job opportunity. So the immigrant labor is very important, but we need to make sure that those job opportunities exist in our communities.
Mr. Johnson, I see you're the president of the Iowa Farm Bureau, and I know the National Federation of Farm Bureaus, the U.S. Federation, has a strong position in favor of significant reforms to the H-2A program, maybe even doing something different because it's gotten so cumbersome for farmers. In addition to that, some additional focus on work visas. And I think the National Federation has taken the position that if we just enforce, like using E-Verify or things like that, without doing significant revisions to work visas in the H-2A program, we could have a significant negative impact on agriculture. Is that similar to the experience that you would have in Iowa?
So the experience in Iowa, first of all, you're correct in your comments. The experience in Iowa for farmers, for most ag producers in Iowa, immigrant labor is important at an arm's length. They're employed at the processor level, right. some of those things because of
which is a sizable industry in Iowa.
Absolutely, absolutely. Not diminishing it, but as far as farmers employing immigrant laborers directly within Iowa, the business structures that we have don't require that they're at the processor level. Now, I have had many conversations in the American level, American Farm Bureau level as well. I actually went down to Arizona and saw some of the lettuce fields and some of those things, and to see that migrant labor come across and watch them come to the fields, understand what they're doing, and then the Port of Yuma actually. I think there's 15,000 immigrants that come and go every day through that one single port. So immigrant labor is very important to those folks, clearly. But, and you know, the dairy industry, and Mr. Sievers is correct. It's regional and it's industry. So I think it's a wide, broad topic. If you talk about labor to any fraction of any company anywhere, labor is a concern right now, and that includes labor from immigrant workforce.
I agree with you. There's no one thing that's going to fix these labor challenges. America's birth rate is not going to dramatically change, and if it did, we wouldn't see anything for 20 years. So I think immigration is a piece of it. There are others as well. Mr. Larson, how about from your perspective in Minnesota?
Well, it's a little outside of my wheelhouse. I do not hire anyone to help me get my work done. I'm kind of a one-man show.
You're kind of like our John Tester colleague here, right?
Yeah, jack of all trades and master of none. But I can say from my region and my perspective that farmers do rely, particularly the dairy industry relies on some help from outside the borders of the U.S. And it actually has gotten much harder for the co-ops who supply us our inputs to hire help and to have good applicators, to have good people on their team. So they have actually accessed outside of U.S. borders now too for help. And I do think that it will remain an important topic to continue to help us, particularly my dairy farmer friends, to keep help in their parlors and in their barns. So.
Mr. Chair, could I ask if Professor Willis could answer the question, too? Just from your perspective as a professor of agricultural economics, how important is the immigrant labor force as part of having a healthy agricultural economy in this country?
Obviously, it's huge. I can tell you, I grew up on a sheep ranch. We had an individual from Peru, herded sheep, was in a sheep camp up in the mountains all the time. And since my dad passed away, don't have the sheep ranch anymore. But it's a huge burden for the sheep producers who I talk to day to day. I think it's a risk of putting some out of business, quite frankly, because of the challenges they face on that.
Well, it's my hope that we as a Congress will listen to our employers who are all telling us they're having a hard time hiring, and we'll find a way to do some things in immigration reform, particularly focused on work visas, work-related immigration that will enable an American economy to really rocket ahead. We've just done an infrastructure bill. Who's going to build it? We've just done a manufacturing bill. Who's going to make it? Immigration isn't the only solution, but I think it's part of it. Appreciate y'all coming today, and thanks for your answers. Yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Senator Kane. For my question, let me turn first to Mr. Willis as to whether climate-smart agriculture is starting to show an effect in crop insurance claims.
Specifically, things such as cover crops, sir? Is that the Yeah, I mean, there's a study put out recently, I think, that looked at some potential benefits to cover crops as it related to prevent plant. I think we're kind of at the early stages of data that could, of really great data. I know USDA has the pandemic cover crop program, and they would have the ability to align yield data with those who utilize that as well. And so I think we're at the beginning of some interesting things. I don't know that I dare say much more than that as far as the benefits yet, but listening to the panelists, it's very impressive to hear what they are doing and the impacts it's having on their operations.
And again, on crop insurance, we're seeing in the news State Farm and Allstate abandoning California. Yeah. We're hearing about Florida coverage difficulties and, frankly, defaults as insurance companies go bankrupt. What are the lessons for the federal crop insurance program that we should extract from that current news?
I think the lessons, they need to stay on top of things. First of all, I have a tremendous amount of respect for those who oversee the crop insurance program. They've done a great job. I think their job's going to become more challenging in the future. You can see the last few years, it has become more challenging, even from the time that I left there. They're going to have to be ahead of the curve, have new programs that address new situations. They recently introduced a program a few years back for hurricane wind loss. Things like that are examples of where they need to be ahead of, to the extent they can, ahead of things so that we don't have major disasters that are not covered.
Yeah, and their colleagues in the flood insurance programs are going to have the same problems to see that we see very much in Rhode Island as a coastal state. Mr. Larson, most of the harvesting in Rhode Island is done from the sea, and when I go out with fishermen, trawlers, I hear things like, this is not my grandfather's ocean anymore, or things are getting weird out there, Sheldon. And you say in your testimony, things aren't the way they used to be. Could you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by that?
I think that there's widespread agreement in my region that we can say that with some level of comfort. And it may be talking to our parents or their parents' generation, if they're still alive, and say, well, I just never recall anything like this before. That's pretty simple, right? We can understand that, we can relate to that, because those are our family members and our community members.
This was a guy who started out working on his grandfather's boat, so
Right,
same experience of passed on knowledge.
Yep, but then there's also, the data. I am a data person. And, we look at that as well, and that shows a pretty strong trend to that same phrase. And in December of last year, December 16th, we had our winter derecho. We had never recorded a tornado in the state of Minnesota prior to that in December, and we had over 20. And as my son and I were hunkered down in the house, and as it shook with 70-mile-an-hour winds that evening, and such widespread damage across the region to buildings, to CHS, our local co-op, it really resounded, like that no one had experienced that. No one had experienced the warm temperatures earlier that day that were similar to what we feel here today in DC, and we were experiencing that in our winter in Minnesota. So I guess that's what I mean by that widespread agreement, that these are our experiences that are occurring and what we need to manage and farm around, and that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, you mentioned the danger of ill-fitting regulations squelching innovation and progress. Is it your view that well-crafted incentives can be a powerful and positive influence?
I think progress is always made better with carrots instead of sticks. Now, voluntary incentive-based programs have made a lot of positive progress in agriculture in the entire history of the industry as this country has been known. And as I've said before, when I was a kid and Mr. Grassley was a young Farm Bureau member back then, our family was plowing our fields. And the progression of practices through the years and through the generations was something that was inherently built, bred, and innovative on farms across the entire country. Just, it's natural to a farmer to want to make progress, to want to do better, to want to be more efficient. And if you remove that incentive through burdensome regulations, my focus changes to meeting a regulation instead of meeting innovation, instead of finding new opportunities that maybe nobody's even thought of yet. So how can you regulate something that's a brand new idea? So that's where my comments are based on,
No, that makes a lot of sense.
to not stifle new ideas and future progress.
I'm going to recognize Senator Braun in a second, but while he gets squared away, let me ask Mr. Sievers. You've been a member of the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities. That has been a success, I gather?
Well, we're still actually going through due diligence with the USDA.
Okay.
So we'd like to speed that process up, but we understand there's a lot of scrutiny that's going to be placed on that program as it evolves and develops. Raceline Alternative Energy, our partner, was awarded an $80 million Climate Smart Commodities grant last fall, and we think we're getting very close. We just actually had a call with the folks at USDA NRCS here about a week ago, and they provided a timeline, so we hope within 30 days we'll have a grant agreement in front of us that we can review and then sign and get moving forward. But yeah, we're really looking forward to that because of the ecological services that we think it can provide, and where you start to integrate and provide incentives for producers to adopt practices such as seeding cover crops on their farmland, and then potentially being able to use that feedstock as well as that from native prairie as a feedstock for anaerobic digestion. So
Okay. Well, there's going to be a period after the hearing closes when if you want to add something in writing, you're welcome to. So if you'd like to expand on your recommendations for that program, please don't hesitate to do so. If you're satisfied with your comments here today, that's fine also. And now Senator Tester has been mentioned as perhaps the leading farmer in the Senate, and now I have the privilege of turning to, I think, the leading forester in the Senate, Senator Braun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's how I got started as a tree farmer back in the late 80s and fell in love with that, and then inevitably got involved in row crops and had the blessing of starting with a few acres where I wanted to build a home someday, and then found out it had a timber resource on it, and as soon as I bought it, it was landlocked. I got access to it, and the loggers called me, wanted to help me out with my trees. So I took the Purdue short course and learned a lot about silviculture in a short period of time. This is an excellent topic, cultivating stewardship. I've been doing it my entire life. You actually, I think, got more opportunity on the farm, but there's a lot in the forest as well. I want to ask the two farmers here. I've been involved in WRP, CRP, EQIP, all that stuff over the years. Haven't done much recently because I started just incorporating that naturally into the practice of managing a woods or farm ground. I notice often, especially now that farming has gotten a lot more corporate. I remember the days when you could put with direct inputs a corn crop out for $140, soybeans for $70. Board of Trade has been nice to farmers, but look at input costs. Look at how much more complicated it is. And when you're trying to weave land management and stewardship into it, I think it's gotten kind of complicated. What I'd like to hear from Mr. Larson and Mr. Sievers would be farmers by nature are conservationists. And we went through some periods where I don't think that was paid attention to decades ago. I don't know of any farmer that doesn't want to keep his dirt on his ground. Then on the other hand, you have something like Waters of the U.S. that's been ping-ponging back and forth. And right after I got in the Senate, I had to dust up with a local conservation officer chasing somebody down on their back 40, maintaining a ditch that hardly ever has any water in it. That's kind of a metaphor for sometimes the good the government can do, and then when it becomes overbearing. If you would each weigh in on how that tug-of-war has been an issue on your own farm. Start with Mr. Sievers, and then like to hear from Mr. Larson as well.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for all you've done for forestry and for advocating for forestry as a critical natural resource for the United States. Our family has implemented, I think, just about every conservation program through the USDA that I can think of. We've implemented field borders and buffer strips and grass waterways and terraces. We've implemented no-till and site-specific farming practices, as Mr. Johnson has talked about. More recently, obviously, we when we built our anaerobic digester and commissioned that in 2013, we received a $500,000 REAP grant for that project to be built and constructed. We received a $300,000 EQIP grant for that, for some of the storage of either the manure before it goes into the digester or for the digestate once it comes back out. So I've been a huge advocate of those kinds of conservation programs and would continue to do so as well going forward. I'm probably not going to weigh in on waters of the United States as much because it's really not an issue that's addressed us, but I think that protecting our water quality is extremely important. But I also think property rights is a valuable and noble cause to embrace as well. And so doing things on our farm that improve water quality by capturing any excess nitrogen, for example, by utilizing cover crops, by making sure filter strips are another way to capture any excess nitrates that might run off that field in the event of an untimely rain.
Let me ask you this. Do you think farmers would do as much of that without the help from the federal government on that particular stuff? Would it be in your own best interest to do it? Sounds like you haven't been impacted much by the regulations that have come along with it in other areas. There are always stipulations in terms of how that works, but do you think farmers would employ those practices otherwise?
I think farmers would be willing to employ those practices because of what you just described, the reverence that we have for our soil.
Yes.
And keeping that soil in place. The problem is, how do you monetize or quantify the loss of that soil to the public and to that farmer? And that's where the incentives really help, is they can help monetize the value of that soil staying on your farm rather than going into a creek or river or stream.
Thank you. Mr. Larson.
I'm on our own farm, and you know, it's something that the Byron area farmers we talk about is like being ahead of the curve, so to speak, on conservation. So all these programs that you've discussed, we enroll in many of them. I appreciate that you bring up forestry. I really take that to heart. I try to plant 1,000 trees a year in marginal productive areas. I do have a sawmill. I know how to fell trees. So that's one side. The forestry definitely cannot be forgotten, and I appreciate that. And there's programs to support that as well. In regards to your specific point about the tug of war, and I kind of walk the line because I work for a conservation district, right? So, but I'm also a farmer. I own a tiling machine. I install my own drain tile. And of course, there's wetland laws that come into play with that. But I experience those wetland laws from the other side at the conservation district too, or I witness these water protection laws from the other side. So from a farmer, I think we really need to look at that from the perspective of being ahead of the game. But it is hard to be ahead of the game when we see that we need to learn how to be ahead of the game. So that's where the programs really come in to help us. And in Olmsted County, where it's the county where I farm in and work, I think the county is ahead of the game because they took $3 million of ARPA funding and dedicated it towards local soil health funding. And because I work at the conservation office, we wrote that program. But the most important goal of that program was efficient delivery, so that a farmer could do everything he needed to do to get that funding right here on his phone. And it could be out in the tractor. He could take the pictures he needed to get his payment from it and upload them and start the payment process. So that efficient delivery is really important. So I do see, the yin and the yang, or the balance of things, just because of my perspective of working both sides.
Well, thank you. Keep up your good stewardship. And I found that I've actually had a better return on managing my forest ground than my farm ground once you get used to the nuances of it. A lot of farmers don't pay attention to that component of it. Thank you.
Senator Merkley. Thank you, Senator Braun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for bringing your expertise to bear. I go and do a town hall in all of my 36 counties each year, and beforehand meet with the local elected officials in that county and the city officials. And just before COVID, I was very surprised in the very southeast corner of my state, in an area that's extremely rural and extremely allergic to any form of government involvement, it was requested that I get them help with monitoring wells. And I nearly fell out of my seat because this is a place where it would be like the last thing anyone would ever ask for is government oversight. And so I said, well, I'm kind of stunned at the question. Give me more background. And they said, well, listen, we've always been against any form of government oversight, but we lost 3 feet on our groundwater last year on top of many, many dozens of feet losses over previous years, and we're all going to be out of business soon if we don't monitor our groundwater use. And we need help figuring that out. It's both the drought in many parts of Oregon that has been persistent over a long period of time now. It's also the reduced snowpack. The Cascades have approximately 20 feet less snowpack on average than they did 90 years ago. This year was a good snowpack year, but that's an anomaly. So in your all's experience, are we seeing a growing concern about climate impacts in terms of groundwater recharge and dropping levels of groundwater in the places that you come from? Just quick survey of your sense of this as an issue.
Quick survey of southeast Minnesota is we do not have a groundwater supply problem. We have a groundwater quality problem, and a lot of work is being done in regards to nitrates and nitrate sequestration in the rooting zone of row crops.
Okay. Anyone else have groundwater issues or not really in your parts of the country?
I'm from northwest Iowa, and when we've been experiencing droughts, but I'm from a very, very flat part of the state, and so our groundwater, we don't irrigate, we don't have any of those issues that change our practices.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Senator. And I'd have to say, echo the comments that Mr. Larson and Mr. Johnson just said. In eastern Iowa, it's more of a water quality issue that we want to continue to monitor and make sure we keep excess nutrients out of our ground.
Well, my ag world is very jealous. We also have a nitrates problem in different parts of the state, but when your wells are dropping dramatically and you can't afford to keep drilling deeper, you're looking at the whole foundation of the community at risk, so a huge concern. I wanted to turn, Mr. Johnson, to the organic farming. Oregon's at the forefront of organic farming, and the recent data from the National Agricultural Statistics Service shows that Oregon doubled its acreage within a few years between 2008 and 2021. What role does organic farming industry have in perhaps being a positive force in helping address some of the climate change issues?
Well, first of all, organic farming, there is a fraction of Iowa agriculture that is growing in the organic production systems as well. And I know many farmers across the state actually who are farming, I'll say traditionally for the lack of a better description, versus organically, and they're adopting organics as well. So they run in both modes of farming operations. I think they're doing that as a market opportunity and also as a risk mitigation opportunity for their own personal operations. There are benefits to both systems, to be quite frank about it. You know, what you would consider probably a relatively conservative farming operation. I've adopted strip till and no till, so I can conserve some of the water resources that you were just talking about. I can manage nutrients better and take care of pests, whether it's weeds or insects, a little bit better in some of those. And there's tools in that system that allows me to do that very efficiently. And then there's the market segment of organic farming, which seems to be an opportunity for some other people. And I don't farm in that system, but I know farmers who do. And you know, they spend a lot of time in their fields, and they have a lot of passes, and it's more labor intensive. And so there's goods and bads, yins and yangs in both systems. And I frankly see it as a diversification opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we have time for another question?
Sure.
We have a big nursery industry in Oregon, and there's constant concern about the ability to ship plants and make sure that they're healthy throughout and not have anything get banned. And what we're seeing is a lot of pests that are spreading. Is the climate problems accelerating that? And I'll just give you one example. It isn't nursery related, but we didn't used to have much of a pine beetle problem in Oregon, but now we have a huge problem with it because mainly the impact of drought has meant that the trees have less sap to fight off the beetles, and then the longer, warmer summer season means that the pine beetles can go through 2 generations of infestation rather than 1. But are you seeing other pest issues that are aggravated by, in our more traditional ag sector, by the climate impacts? To whomever has any insights.
I guess I can't specifically say because it's outside of my knowledge base about the effect that climate change has had on some of our significant pest issues. But what I can say is that it absolutely needs to be on the radar because, for example, emerald ash borer has cost our cities and our communities millions of dollars to remove dead ash trees or soon to be dead ash trees. So it's not just limited to that one insect of our experiences, but it absolutely needs to be on the radar because of the potential cost it has to communities, including rural landowners that have to remove a few trees around their house because they're dead now. So
I'm going to recognize Senator Grassley now for a few additional questions.
Thank you.
And then if no one else has come, we'll close the hearing. Senator Grassley.
For Mr. Larson, I heard you talk about how you meet regularly with a lot of other farmers. Does that involve the pooling of their resources to better market their oats, or do you have organizations beyond just your regular meeting of fellow farmers?
So far we are still very loosely held. That is, we do not have an entity that we meet under, but we are pooling resources, and that could be equipment to get the work done. You brought up oats. It may be to plant the oats. It may be to harvest the oats and to market them as together so that we have a strength in numbers. And, I think that was kind of the basis of farmers getting together was to, leverage what we have together rather than on our own. And it's also, again, the knowledge sharing that comes with it with something specific. But the resources are very important, especially when a farmer is considering something. So they're not ready to take the leap into buying new equipment, which would be quite costly. But the neighbor has that equipment in the group, per se, and can be hired to get that done. They can experience it. They can go through some cropping seasons and see if it's a good fit for them. Equipment and financing new equipment for conservation practices or climate-related practices, climate farming practices, is an opportunity because that funding, it's a leap. Again, like if we're thinking about something different, if we want to learn about it, we need that equipment to do it, and funding for it outside of our farmer group is something we should look into.
Mr. Willis, I've heard you mention crop insurance in your opening statement and to a couple questions that's been asked of you. So I want to ask about President Biden's USDA estimates that crop insurance premium subsidies would increase somewhere between 3.5% to 22% by the end of the century due to climate change, a broad range which is extrapolated from using unrealistic RCP 8.5 scenario. What factors do you believe will cause the greatest increase in crop insurance premium subsidies into as this century evolves?
I'm not sure it'll be that much different than what has increased in, the last 20 years. And not all those things are actually bad. One of those will be crop prices. As prices, the value of what you insure increases, the insurance is going to cost a little bit more. The other thing is increased yields. Obviously, that one right there is something that has, increased the liability historically. The study brought that a little bit into question moving forward. But the program naturally will cost a little bit more over time just because the value of the crops. If it weren't that way, we would have, bankruptcies in rural America if it didn't increase a little bit. But it would be value of the crops, and it would be acreage in large part.
Yeah. And maybe one other question for anybody that can speak to it, and this comes from my reading business papers that have suggested when it comes to selling carbon credits and getting income from it. I've read of one African country, West African country, and I read of forced people in Ecuador that have been able to make money selling carbon credits. So why aren't we getting advantage or making any income from carbon credits for those things that we've already done, like no-till cover crop, minimum till, and anything else you can do that sequesters carbon? Or what you're doing, for instance, in your digester as an example. Is there an answer to that, or is it just a rhetorical? I don't mean it to be a rhetorical question, but it might be a rhetorical question.
Well, I think that's an excellent question, Senator, and thank you for asking that. I've been advocating for that. I was a member of the governor's carbon sequestration task force here a couple of years ago, and it's an evolving industry, so there's a lot of answers that haven't been provided yet. A lot of questions, a lot more questions than answers, certainly in the whole carbon credits arena. But I advocate, as you've just indicated, that a baseline for that effort to create the value of those carbon credits is absolutely the most important part. It's just like Mr. Johnson said, you have to be able to measure before you can monitor and monetize. And once you start measuring, well, where do we start measuring? And I've just half seriously, jokingly said, it's when I parked the moldboard plow 25 years ago. Maybe that was a good place to start to create my baseline. And in so doing, the monetization of our carbon credits in our farming operation would be far greater than maybe the $20 or $30 an acre that are being proposed. They might be upwards of several $100s an acre when you aggregate and stack those additional carbon credit benefits. And where we've really started to see the acceleration of those benefits to our soil is once we implemented the anaerobic digesters and the utilization of livestock manure and biomass. And therefore, the advocation that I am certainly in favor of is we need more livestock to be able to monetize more carbon credits than we need fewer livestock. So in Iowa and in the upper Midwest, I think that that's a revelation we're going to come to at some point, that more livestock will actually enhance the ability for farmers to sequester and capture carbon and create more value in the credits there.
Isn't it a little ironic that you're asking for a situation you described based upon previous practices? And it's not here, but it's here for people in Africa and Ecuador to benefit from it. It just doesn't make sense. So
right.
if there's a market out there for that, why isn't there a market for what you're talking about?
I couldn't agree more.
I'm done.
And that's a very useful question to end on. I'd offer two observations. One, the offsets market has been loaded up with fake offsets, which doesn't mean that there aren't real ones out there. It just means that there's been a terrible experience with fake offsets or double-counted offsets or misunderstood offsets. It doesn't necessarily mean that they were fraudulent, but they were ineffectual at a minimum, and I think some were probably even fraudulent. So the market started off on a bad footing. We tried, in the Growing Climate Solutions Act, to give the U.S. Department of Agriculture a mechanism to look at what actually really works and is entitled to a proper offset so that the farmer can get the benefit from taking the step that the USDA has identified. Highly localized thing. We sort of were thinking that it might go like the old farm agents who know the county, know the farms, know the locality, and could provide good credentialing of the climate effects, the sequestering effects, whatever, of different practices, so that in fact, at the end of the day, the farm does get the reward. The USDA has not, with great alacrity, picked up the Growing Climate Solutions Act problem, despite the fact that it passed about 2 years ago now, I think. So that would be a good place to put a little bit of attention, I think, on like where are they with that, what offsets are credible, and how should they be scored? Because it is useful to our question, Mr. Johnson, about incentives. If you're going to be paid to do something that you want to do anyway, that's a good outcome. And if it encourages better behavior and more behavior of that kind, so much the better. So I'm going to wrap up. Thank you very much again, Ranking Member Grassley, for making this a bipartisan hearing. I can't help but note that as we sit here in this hearing, we are under air quality warnings in Washington, D.C. The air quality warnings in New York City right now are so bad that we are, I think, only behind New Delhi in terms of global bad air quality. It's coming from wildfires that are coming from Canada that relate to combustibility that we've talked about already in forests, that tracks back to the changes in the climate that we are experiencing as a result of fossil fuel emissions. So it's happening in real life right around us, even as we sit in this air-conditioned room in this Senate chamber. And I would close by asking unanimous consent that we put into the record the report that was done by the Commodities Futures Trading Commission during the Trump administration, actually, with excellent leadership by the former risk manager for Goldman Sachs, a firm that has to know quite a lot about risk and get it right quite a lot, who was actually a witness of ours in an early hearing, Bob Litterman, and supported by a very powerful array of American corporate interests, including particularly agricultural interests. And I think putting that report from the Trump administration into the record would be a useful way to close out. So with that, I will thank the witnesses. We have a little bit of time, like a day? A day, 24 hours. All right, 24 hours for any member who wants to ask additional questions to all of you. To get those things in writing, we will get them to you. We would ask that you respond in a week if you do get such questions. You can take Mr. Sievers, my question about your partnership program as a question. If you care to answer further, you're most welcome to. Let me thank you for bringing your experience here. Again, for a guy from a state, most of whose harvesting comes from the ocean, this has been very helpful to hear. So thank you very much.